You know, I really love Treasures, but one of the reasons that makes Treasures Treasures is Harmony Dust. For those of you who know Harmony, she's an incredible person. I became friends with her about 5 years ago, and I'll never forget the conversation. You know, I kind of tease Harmony about this because I say, you cannot have a conversation for 10 minutes and not talk about some social injustice in this world that you want to save and fix. And I love that about her because she's so passionate. And sure enough, I had a 10-minute conversation with her the first time I met her, and she was talking about treasures and how we have to change the situation and restore women. And I love that about her, and I never forgot it. And it made me passionate about it, about the cause. And so before I welcome up Harmony, I just want to tell you, for some of you who don't know, a few of the things, and probably a lot of us that do know, I've known Harmony for a long time, and I didn't even know some of these things about Harmony Dust. Did you know that Treasures is the first and only organization of its kind? It's been around almost 9 years, and it started with nothing, Harmony says, but with access to a printer, her checkbook, and a computer. I love that. But now it's a 501c3 nonprofit organization operating on just under $250,000 a year. And she has plans, again, those of you who know Harmony, you know she always has plans. She has plans to be able to create a for-profit business to be able to fund the nonprofit, which I think is a great idea. And then she also wants to create a residential program for the ladies, which I love it. She has a master's in social welfare from UCLA. She was a youth social worker of the year for the National Association of Social Workers. How do you even get that award? That's incredible. I know. She has been featured in Glamour magazine, the Tyra Banks show. She did work with Dr. Drew on a show, Sex Rehab. She has a book out. She speaks all over the nation. I could keep going on and on. She's a great friend. Harmony Dust, come on up here.
I love this place. Look at the moon. I'm sorry. But look at the moon. I'm going to try not to distract us from the vision and the purpose tonight, though. I hope that you guys had a chance to go to some of the interactive stations tonight. We had the 3D stats wall out there and the iPad stations over in the corner. One of my favorite maps on that, for those of you who may have missed it, and hopefully we'll have it up on the website later, but I found a map that shows it basically shows the way people in the United States spend their time, and it uses colors to differentiate what regions are people spending more time on what activity. And so they compared people spending time at bowling alleys, gun shops, churches, and strip clubs. And did you know that people in Los Angeles spend more time at strip clubs than churches, bowling alleys, and gun shops? Isn't that amazing? And the reason we present you with all these statistics and all the data, besides the fact that I'm a total stat geek and I love research because I like facts that I can sink my teeth into, and I like things that are evidence-based, because every single one of those statistics, every single one of those numbers represents a real person with a real story. And so I like illustrating both. And so you're beginning to hopefully become familiar with the issue that there are more women in the sex industry right now than any other time in history. That up to 90% of women in the sex industry were sexually abused as children, that they experience post-traumatic stress disorder at rates equivalent to veterans of combat war. And I love the fact that right now sex trafficking has moved into the social justice spotlight, and I think it's awesome that it seems that we're beginning to become aware that this is not just an international issue, this is not just something that's happening in other countries, but this is happening in our own backyard. And what I also want people to recognize is the fact that 70% of sex trafficking victims that are female are trafficked into the commercial sex industry. What does that mean? That means they're working in strip clubs. They're working on porn sets. They're working in massage parlors and for escort agencies. And I think it's so important to notice that. And at the same time, you can't reach women in the sex industry without reaching women who are victims of trafficking. But of course, not all the women we work with are. Many of them would say they entered the sex industry by choice. But I want to unpack what that might look like for many of them. Just the other day, I was thinking about the concept of the glass ceiling. The glass ceiling is a term that was popularized in the 1980s in a widely read article in the Wall Street Journal. And what it is, it's a metaphor for the invisible barriers that keep women in the workplace from reaching the same levels of success as their male counterparts. And the thing about the glass ceiling is that most people don't even recognize it's there until they find themselves running into it, and even then can't really describe what it is. And so I started thinking about that as it relates to women in the sex industry, and kind of got this picture in my head, that you picture a woman who perhaps has a background of sexual abuse and trauma. And for her, at some point, became a victim in that way. And I know for me, much of my reaction, and I'm going to share my story in a moment, much of my reaction to the sexual abuse and rape that I experienced as a child and as a teen was this feeling of profound powerlessness. And then my reaction to that was wanting to take back control of what I had lost control of, which was my sexuality. And so in many ways, sex became a tool for survival, and it became a weapon. And so in a way, that became an invisible barrier. And then you maybe compile that with maybe a dysfunctional family situation, a broken home, a lack of a healthy support system, and that can become another barrier. And then you bring into that mix perhaps financial challenges, lack of education, lack of employable job skills. And here you have this woman in this experience where she's learned that sex can be a tool and a way of surviving. She doesn't have the support system, and now she's finding herself faced with financial issues. And in that experience, sex work can seem like a viable solution to her problems, especially in the context of a culture that not only tolerates the sexualization and objectification of women, but celebrates it. In the context of a culture, a country that spends over $13 billion a year on the commercial sex industry. In a culture that spends over $3,000 every second on pornography. And now it looks like a viable option to her. And so she steps into it. And the research also shows that the longer a woman is in the sex industry, the more negative the impact. So the longer she's in it, the more severe the effects of it. And we know that 33% of women in porn meet the diagnostic criteria for depression. And now her risk of sexually transmitted disease, mental health issues, substance abuse issues are now increased. And then by the time she realizes that the thing that she thought was the solution to her problems has become a barrier in itself, she feels trapped. And she often doesn't recognize it until she tries to get out and realizes she feels stuck. And that was my experience. And so what we at Treasures do is we stand there and we hand her the tools when she's ready to break the wall. And equally as important, we help her pick up the pieces. As a matter of fact, it's kind of funny. We were just talking last weekend, we hosted a care retreat for the women that we serve in Idlewild. Our team, our care workers took 18 women up into the mountains into a beautiful cabin and just spent time with them, leading them through exercises of self-reflection and just giving them some new tools and empowering them and doing things related to body image and self-esteem and that sort of thing. But one of the exercises that they did was they took a glass and they put it in a napkin and they crushed it up into pieces. But then they took those broken pieces and put them together to create a mosaic. And that's kind of a metaphor for what we do at Treasures. And there are 3 basic tenets to our program, and it's reach, restore, and equip. We reach women in strip clubs and in porn conventions with the message that they are loved, valued, and purposed. We provide opportunities for them to seek restoration through our weekly therapist-led support group that's led by a woman who is a PhD in psychology and also a spiritual formation director, so she can address the psychological and the spiritual issues that the women are facing. We have a care team that does one-on-one peer mentoring with the women and just takes their hand and walks them through the recovery journey. And we meet them where they're at. We meet them where they're at. We empower them to set goals for themselves. We don't set our agenda for what we think their life should look like, what we think their recovery should look like, but we meet them where they're at and empower them in that place and give them tools. And the third tenet of the program is to equip them with new tools. And we have workshops on budgeting and finance and career development. And actually next week we're going to be having one on body image and health and fitness. And we're also passionate about equipping leaders to replicate this model of outreach in their communities. And to date, we have trained over 40 outreach leaders throughout the world and are providing ongoing mentoring to 25 leaders through our Strip Church network. So that's a picture of what the program looks like. And the reason I started this is because I remember what it felt like to feel trapped and to not see a way out, to just feel so hopeless and powerless and stuck. And just want to give you a picture of my story. I was raised actually just over the way in Venice, California, in a neighborhood called Ghost Town. And like Chuck said, I'm a social worker, so I believe that environmental context is important. And so to give you a picture of the context that I come from, I witnessed people in my neighborhood stabbed to death in front of my eyes. I can vividly remember 8 years old, someone breaking into my home and beating my mother nearly to death, and the police didn't come till 3 days later. That's the kind of violence that was in my neighborhood. You put that together with the fact that my mother was struggling with a cocaine addiction and my father had left, and I was left vulnerable and exposed to porn at the age of 3, sexually abused throughout my life starting at the age of 5 by multiple people, both men and women, and then raped as a teen. One of my abusers was my mother's boyfriend, and I finally stood up for myself and said, this is it. I've had enough. He goes or I go. And she kicked him out, or sent him on his way, I guess. But she went with him, leaving me at 13 alone with my 8-year-old brother with nothing but $20 and a book of food stamps. And it was that summer that a boy in my neighborhood, who now, hindsight being 20/20, I'm 35 and I see things a lot differently than I did when I was 13, I realized that he preyed on my vulnerability. He had come from a pimp culture, and from the very beginning of our relationship had every intention of profiting from my sexuality. I remember the day he looked me in the eye and he said, I could sell you. I could sell you if I wanted. And the next person that walked down the street, he looked at them and he said, you got a nickel? Like he was going to sell me for a nickel. And that was his mentality. But here's what I saw. I was 13. My mother had now abandoned me. My father had abandoned me. And I saw someone who came around and he bought me food. And he told me, anybody messes with you, you tell them I got your back. I'm going to protect you. He showed me the protection and the provision that I had always longed for, the attention of a male that I had always longed for. And even when the relationship became physically and emotionally abusive, I stayed because I thought I needed him. And I thought that's what love looked like anyways. That's what I saw modeled to me. And it was that relationship that landed me in a strip club at 19. And like many women, I thought I was just going to get in, get out. I thought maybe it was going to be a solution. And finally, I had the upper hand. And I was going to exploit for myself what had always been exploited, and that was my sexuality. But I found myself feeling more and more trapped. And then at the mercy of the people I depended on to exploit me, because if they didn't, I didn't eat. I was trapped. And I remember what that felt like. And I also remember how powerful it was for me to have someone reach out to me and extend a hand in relationship and show me unconditional love and invite me into a healthy, supportive community of people. And through that community, and it was my church community, I began to rebuild my life. And this message, loved, valued, purposed, this is more than just a tagline. I firmly believe, and because I have experienced it myself, that when people get a revelation of the fact that they are loved, valued, and purposed, it's a game changer. Can't live in contradiction to it. I remember the moment I was standing in the middle of the strip club, and it hit me. I have been created with a purpose. And I knew there had to be more to life than what I was seeing. And so I remember I found myself sitting across the street from a strip club years later, the same one I worked at, and I had gone through recovery, and I had learned new tools, and I had begun this healing journey. And I remember standing outside of that strip club and praying for the women inside and feeling like I was standing outside of a prison that had held me captive, and I knew I had to do something. I didn't want to just walk away and, like Holly said, just have overcome, but I wanted to see liberty happen in the lives of other women, and that it's from that place that the vision of Treasures was birthed. And really, we started as a small grassroots outreach, just going into strip clubs, showing love, lay counselors, peer mentors, and it's just continued to grow from that point. And it's funny, actually. When I was getting my master's in social welfare, we had to do these projects, and one of them was to create a program and to apply for a fake grant. And so I used that as an opportunity to just really dream big about what Treasures could look like. And so many of the pieces of that program are happening today. It blows my mind. And there are many more to come, and I know it. Thank you. And what are the outcomes? The outcomes are transformed lives. Some of the stories of the women are in your booklets, and I encourage you to read them. But they're women like Kate, who's with us here tonight and gave me permission to share a piece of her story, who 17 years after walking away from the sex industry realized that she still had some recovery to do, that there were some things that maybe she wasn't facing. And so she came to Treasures and began to get support in her recovery journey, and now has gone on to be trained through our Strip Church program, is now a leader in her community, reaching other women in the sex industry. Women like Rachel, who's also given me permission to share this and is here tonight. Her last night working in a strip club was the night that we came in and brought gifts. And now she is a proud business owner. She's opened a health and fitness center across the street from the Treasures office. And next week, we'll be hosting our women at a workshop on body image and health and fitness. And we are sharing this vision with you because we want to empower you. You're going to have an opportunity to give financially later. This is a fundraiser, but this is also about empowering you. And what I want you to walk away with is the understanding that you have a role to play in this, because each of you can be a voice in your sphere of influence. And what that looks like, it can be as simple as this. The next time someone invites you to a strip club or talks about porn or the sex industry comes up, you don't have to nag them or be judgmental, but you can just say, I wonder what led that woman to make those choices. I wonder how she ended up working in that strip club. Just even ask the question and begin to facilitate dialogue. Familiarize yourself with the stats. Familiarize yourself with the story so that you can be a voice in your sphere of influence. Actually, and it can also be as simple as this. I didn't ask permission for this one. I hope it's okay. A good friend of mine was at a park recently, and, just with her kids, and she just took some time. She saw a girl there who was alone with her son, and she just took some time to ask the second and the third question, and sure enough, this girl was working as a prostitute. And she had tried to leave the industry at one point, but when she found out she was pregnant, she ended up back in it. And my friend just reached out, loved her, has invited her to community, has invited her into the community of Treasures. And it can be as simple as that, asking the second and third question, not judging, and being a voice in their lives. So I hope that you leave tonight feeling really empowered that you can be a part of the solution, because that's what we're inviting you to do tonight. So thank you.